So, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for this first ever webinar on Costa Rica, specifically preserving paradise in March. Thank you for all the travelers that are going to be listening to this and others that might be interested in our program and how valuable our lecturers are when giving information about our trips. It's one of the highlights that we offer. We are so thrilled. I'm Carrie Allen, Director of the Vanderbilt Travel Program, and I'm so thrilled today to have Professor Steve Baskauf with us, who is a senior lecturer in biological sciences, and he is more noted around campus as giving a wonderful arboretum tour and gives us all information about the history, genus, and makeup of our arboretum at the Vanderbilt campus, which is well known to everybody, and we all enjoy those every year. Additionally, he runs programs for graduate students and for the majors at Vanderbilt, and is instrumental in this program because of his knowledge in the ecology and preservation of Costa Rica. So, Steve, I would love for you to say a few words about your thoughts on Costa Rica, and then I've got a couple of questions to kind of ask you about it.
Yeah, well, Costa Rica is a pretty amazing place, and as a biologist, I'm completely biased towards thinking that the diverse landscapes and ecosystems that Costa Rica has are probably its most amazing feature, although the people there are also fantastic as well. Yeah, I could just talk a little bit about some of the different parts of the country that I've been through and that you're going to see. One of the interesting places is Parque Nacional de Quetzales, which is in the mountains south of the capital, and that's an interesting area that's a cloud forest. And I think the coolest thing that I saw there were the famous quetzales, the quetzals, and they're so cool because they have the long tail feathers, and they're one of the several native species of trogons they have there. And when we saw them, they were eating these little native avocados called aguacatillos, which is one of their favorite foods. So that's just a real treat to see those birds in addition to the forest.
So it's a real bird watching paradise.
Yeah. I mean, depending on how much you're into it, there's a lot of really interesting species of birds there. The trogons are around the different places around the country, but the area near Parque Nacional Los Quetzales is one of the easiest places to see them. You have to work a little harder some of the other places. But there are also amazing hummingbirds and some of the larger birds. We saw scarlet macaws fly over one time, so partly you have to be lucky, but there certainly are a lot of amazing birds there. And along the coast, where near Manuel Antonio, that's an area that's been a lot more developed by agriculture. So, there's a lot of palm oil plantations and things like that. But Manuel Antonio is kind of a little island natural area in that otherwise pretty agricultural area. But it's one of the best places in the country to see some of the larger animals like sloths, coatis, and then the three different species of monkeys, howlers, squirrel monkeys, and white-faced monkeys are all present in that park. So it's kind of a great place for seeing different kinds of wildlife. And then the other area, I think towards the end of the trip, you'll be kind of crossing over the Cordillera Central, the Central Mountains. This is an area, I mean, like many other places, the mountainous areas are some of the least developed areas, and there's a giant national park called Braulio Carrillo that is 90% covered with primary forest. And so I think the place where the trip is going to go is on sort of the north edge of that. near the famous La Selva biological station in the Sarapiqui River. So there's probably some spillover of wildlife from that. Um, but once you sort of get down out of the mountains, then you start encountering agricultural areas that have been carved out of the forest. So one of the challenges for Costa Rica is to try to preserve what remains of nature in that area while also making it possible for people to live in a sustainable way.
So, Steve, what would you say was the positive impact that tourism has brought to Costa Rica, or has there been one?
Well, certainly, I think that showing people the value of preserving natural areas um, provides an economic incentive for them to leave them intact rather than logging them or converting them to agriculture. So that's certainly something that's been recognized because tourism is a big industry in Costa Rica. But it's not to say that every effect's positive. As I mentioned, Manuel Antonio is a relatively small area, and it's also one of the most popular areas for people to visit. So you have a large number of tourists packed in a relatively small natural area. So that has, changed the character, particularly of like the small towns around the park that, maybe 30 years ago would have been kind of sleepy little towns. Now they're packed with a lot of tourists. So there have been some probably negative effects, but overall, I think that tourism and ecotourism in general has been recognized by people as a positive thing and an incentive for them to help preserve the habitat there.
And one of the things you mentioned to me that I find interesting is that there's been an increased forested area, increasing amount of forested area instead of depleting it. And that is so interesting and unusual for that. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems in the developing world certainly is the pressure to cut down forests. And, Costa Rica certainly experienced that like many other places. By the mid 1980s, Costa Rica had lost almost half of its forests due to a combination of logging and conversion to farming. But the unusual thing is that Costa Rica has managed since the 1980s really to turn that around through tree planting and conservation measures. So of that lost forested area, they've reforested almost a quarter of it. It's really one of the few developing countries that actually has an increasing rather than decreasing forested area. And I mean, there's a number of reasons why this has been the case in Costa Rica and not other places. And certainly Costa Rica's government should get a lot of credit. They've established actual goals for the country in terms of the fraction of land that they want to be protected as natural areas. They also have very strong educational programs in the schools. So from the time they grow up, the kids really realize the value of the country's natural resources, and that allows people to, realize that they have a vested interest in preserving natural areas. And they're really, when you talk to people, they're really quite proud of what they've managed to accomplish in terms of preserving natural areas. Another thing that's interesting and somewhat unique about Costa Rica is it's one of the few countries that really doesn't have a significant military presence, and so they've been able to take a lot of money that other Central American countries have poured into military into investments in healthcare and sustainable development. So as a result, people really now have the kind of economic security that allows them to live relatively well for people in developing countries. And so in a lot of places there's pressure by poor people who are desperate to make a living, and their only way to do so is slash and burn subsistence farming. So the fact that Costa Rica has developed to the point where people have a kind of a stake in the economy, that contributes, I think, to their ability to kind of put a cap on the amount of deforestation that's happened.
Well, that's encouraging because so many of the Central and South American countries are suffering financially as well, and this sounds like it is not. I would like to also ask you, this is kind of a broad question, but everybody's going to zip line and everybody's going to canopy walk and all that. What other things, maybe other than what you've mentioned, which has been a lot, would people look for in Costa Rica or be attentive to while they're there?
Well, I would just encourage people to listen a lot. I mean, this is sort of one of my favorite activities in both in natural areas, but also in like towns. If you're in a natural area, of course, there's lots of if you can just sort of be quiet and listen to the insects and the birds, particularly if it's like maybe early in the morning and you have some kind of moments by yourself. But I've also enjoyed, once you get out of San Jose and you get into the smaller towns, they just have a really fun, pleasant vibe there. And, if you get a chance to sit on a park bench and do some people watching and kind of, you can blend in there, sort of, at least, most North American visitors, if they don't speak English, can sort of blend in and not stick out like a sore thumb, and that gives you sort of the opportunity to watch school kids on their way to school and families talking and couples walking together and just kind of absorb the culture and the vibe of the town. That's one of the things I really enjoyed doing there.
Oh, I'm sure. And we're going to have some great leadership on this trip. It's done through a good company that we work with that does a lot of eco tours, and they're going to have some good guides. And I think if there's anything you can say about Costa Rica and its financial situation. Of course, you did mention finances regarding tourism and forestry and that, but it sounds like it's more of a tourist-centric country, but it's run well. And would you say that they're going to see anything particularly? Is there, and you may or may not know this, Steve, but is there a lot of poverty, or is there anything that would be typical of a Central American country?
Well, I mean, one of the issues with like poverty is maybe not poverty, but what does it mean to be, say, a rich person? That's all pretty relative. So, compared perhaps to North American standards, people in Costa Rica aren't as well off, but people there, compared to some of the neighboring countries, they're actually quite well off. People have cars. People have, homes that are, concrete block homes. So, perhaps not something you consider luxurious, but by world standards, actually pretty well developed. So I haven't spent a lot of time in San Jose, which is, the largest city. And so I can't really say a lot about poverty there, but certainly in the rural areas, people are, have a lot more resources in terms of homes and vehicles and things like that than in other third world countries that I have traveled in. Yeah, so, I mean, it's definitely still a developing country, but relative to other developing countries, it's probably kind of near the top end. And it does have some, some industries and commerce, and so yeah, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to ask you next. Is there any export? What would be their, other than tourism, what would be their business export?
Oh boy, I have to say I'm not really much of an expert on
that.
I can't really answer that.
That's understood. I won't make you say that one. Anything else that you find particularly interesting about Costa Rica that you'd like to share? Is any thoughts at all? Additionally,
In my experience, I mean, all the Costa Ricans that I met were super friendly, and I mean, again, I didn't spend much time in San Jose, so in terms of like the crime rate and things like that, it's probably worse there than in the rural areas. But I really, especially in the small towns, is a place where I felt really comfortable just kind of walking around and taking in the atmosphere, and didn't really feel like I was a target for crime or anything like that. I felt really quite welcomed and at home, and the interactions that I had with Costa Ricans in stores or shops or people I met were all super friendly. So it's really a place with a lot of great friendly people. So I really appreciate that about it.
it seems like that. And one more question about that shopping you mentioned. We have shoppers. Our Vanderbilt travelers certainly love to shop. Is there anything particular that's a focus thing to get or to find while you're in Costa Rica, or is it just interesting crafts that they provide? Do you remember?
Oh,
You may not.
yeah, I don't know. There's all kinds of stuff there. You see a lot of the same kind of tourist souvenirs in the souvenir shops. I mean, we one time when we were at one of the beaches there, we just met some local people that were selling carvings that they had made. I don't think they were like commercial products, but just something their family made.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of special. The other thing, which I also thought was pretty cool, was I just went into the grocery store and bought a bag of coffee off the shelf, some Costa Rican coffee, and it was really quite good. That wasn't even in a tourist shop. So
No,
if
I'll
you're into
bet.
coffee, I would recommend that.
Yeah, that's a great thing to remember. Exactly. Well, I think our people are just in for a nice adventure and a wildlife and eco scene and birds, and it just sounds like we've got the ideal setting for that. So, Steve, thank you so much. This has been great. I think people will enjoy hearing what you have to say about it, and I'll give you a report when they come back. And
yeah, well, I hope everybody has a good time, and we actually stayed, I think, in the same place when we were in the Quetzal Park area, and a Quetzal landed in the tree out in front of the door of the place we were staying. So I think you're all gonna have a great time. So enjoy.
So look up and pay attention is what you're saying.
Yep.
Yep. There we go. Well, thank you so much, Steve, and we'll let you get back to your teaching and research, and appreciate your time so much today.
All right. Well, enjoy.
Thank you.
Okay.